Hello friends, I'm Emily and today we are going to talk about library books. Now I don't know about you, but I have very fond memories of going to the library all my life, my whole entire life. When I was a little child, getting to go and finally being old enough to like go and find your own book sort of a thing where you're going to the library for school books or whatever. I was homeschooled and so we would go and pick up like different books that we needed for school and whatnot, and to be able to have like get a list from my mom and be like, oh, I'm gonna go find them. And when I finally started understanding like how the like the alphabetized books by the authors and stuff and where everything was, and like, oh, there's a nonfiction, and now I know how to like look up the right nonfiction book. And I love libraries so much. They are one of my favorite places in the whole world. And I think that they are a integral part of society, and I will be heartbroken if there ever comes a time where people decide to just shut down libraries. I think that would be the worst. It would be so bad. Please don't. And like many bookworms and readers out there, I love going to the library to pick up different books that either I just don't have in my collection, or if it's by an author that I'm not sure if I'm going to love or not or something. I really try for my own personal library to make sure that they're books that I have either read already, or they're books that, you know, a library doesn't have. I can't get my hands on them unless I purchase them. Or most of my books are just old, dear, favorite friends, and I have read them many times, and that way I just have like, I know that all the books that I own I really like, and then I have a smaller selection of books that I've owned that, like I said, if the library didn't have them or I just couldn't get my hands on them, ebooks or whatever. But in the last few weeks, I've been actually going back to the library and picking up different books from the library and finding some to read, and it's actually been helpful for me because I don't know if you work this way, but sometimes that deadline of I'm only allowed to have this book for the next 3 weeks it helps me to actually read the books that I've been wanting to read. And yeah, like I said, nobody has enough money or space, or maybe somebody does, that would be wild, to own all of the books that they want to read and that they love. So I love taking advantage of libraries. And I have a stack of books here, and we're going to kind of briefly talk through them and why I picked them and all of that. But anyway, I thought it would be kind of fun to have a little series of videos here on my channel where I kind of do, yeah, like library book vlog style videos. I don't think I said that quite right, but library book reading vlog style videos where we can just figure out which books I'm going to actually read and which ones I'm not going to read. Because that's oftentimes what I'll do, is when I go to the library, I'll grab books that sound kind of interesting, but then I'll read like the first chapter or two and I know pretty quickly, this isn't my cup of tea. So that's what a few of the books on this list are, or were. So let's kind of dive right in, go through them. I've already finished one of them, and then one of them I got specifically as just sort of a skim read book because it was a reread. So I've already finished that one. And so then I've got, 4 other ones that I haven't read yet. But yeah, so let's kind of talk about them. Let's talk about, first off, A Court of Mist and Fury, Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the A Court of Thorns and Roses series. I have a lot of thoughts on this series overall. I guess Cliff Notes version is, I don't necessarily think it's worth quite as much hype as it got, but, and again, it's not my typical sort of reading. It is not any sort of a clean romance. There's a lot of like violence, and it's a very, it's a fantasy book, so there's a lot of different fairies and whatnot, and like I said, we're not going to go super into depth in it because I would like to kind of make a separate video. I don't know if that will ever happen, but talking about my thoughts on this series. However, for this book in particular, I think this is honestly the only book in the series that's worth reading more than once, maybe. But this particular book, I was reading it when I was going through a really rough part of my life, and it was a bit of a solace for me. The main character, Feyre, is going through some different life upheaval. I don't know exactly, like a lot of challenges in her life is turned upside down and stuff, and I was in a very similar place when I picked up the book. I will say, I didn't read the entire thing. Like I said, it was more of a skim read. There were a few sections that I was like, oh, I kind of want to read this. I forgot how explicit the, like, love scenes are and whatnot. Not my thing. I do not like that about these books, that they are very, very, very explicit on their love scenes and whatnot. But the thing that I do really like about this book is that there is such good character development in some of the different characters, and it introduces some really, really cool characters. So honestly, the only parts of the series that I really like is this book, and then like the first quarter of the third book, and then the rest of it, it's fine. But so that's all I've got to say on this one. I've already done that. I just need to get it back to the library because I've gotten what I wanted from it. The main reason why I have actually reread it a couple of times is, like I said, because it has a sort of sentimental, not necessarily, it's not quite nostalgic or sentimental, but it has kind of a special place for me because of when I first read it. So yeah, not a clean romance, not a sweet, wholesome, cozy book that is my typical read of choice. But I think it has its place sometimes. The next book that I read this one super quickly, and this one was one that I didn't even go to the library looking for. I just picked it up on a whim because I saw it. My toddler is he loves going to the library with me, and he will run like up and down the aisles of books, and I'm like trying to corral him so he doesn't bother anybody, but he's so cheeky about it. And I think this was on one of the aisles that he just like ran down, and I was like, oh, that looks kind of interesting. So this is Ashes on the Moor by Sarah M. Eden, and it's a proper romance. I don't know the publishers, but there's a collection of books that were released in the they're called proper romances, and they're clean romances. They're usually very wholesome stories, and I've read 2 or 3 of them, and I'd like to do, again, another video idea. I'd like to do a video where I talk about some of my favorite clean romances. This one I really, really enjoyed. I don't know if I've ever read anything by Sarah M. Eden before, but this one was talking about Evangeline, whose family has all unfortunately died from a sickness except for one sister, and they are kind of left to the mercy of their other family members. And so she has to travel to a small town in I don't remember if it says specifically. It talks about the town, but I don't know if it talks about where. It's in England from what, or no. I don't actually know. I don't know if it ever specified if it was in England or if it's in America. I don't know. It's a factory town, and her grandfather owns the factory there, and she has to become the school teacher for the children in this town. And it's a very poor town. It's a lot of like the factory workers are not wealthy by any means, and so she is kind of thrown to the wolves to a degree by her aunt, who's a very unpleasant lady, and she has to try and fix up the schoolhouse and start teaching school and learn how to do all this when all her life she's been brought up as, you know, like a lady. She was not crazy wealthy, but she was definitely wealthier than a lot of the people in this town, and so she doesn't know how to like cook or make her own clothes or any of those sorts of really like practical things. She doesn't know how to do any of those things, but in order for her younger sister to be able to live with her, she has to, I guess, meet the standards, prove that she can take care of herself to a degree. And so she's got a lot of fire and spunk, and she's able to like grasp the challenges with both hands and really strive to do it. And then she meets Dermot, McCormick, he's her neighbor, and he's an Irish neighbor, and he's got a young son, and their interactions kind of start off a little bit rocky because he's kind of got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder because he's been treated kind of poorly because he's Irish, and so they meet, and it was a really, really lovely story. I really appreciated the fact that there was no crazy, like, love triangle aspect to it. Like, you know from the beginning, like, these are the two love interests. Like, this is kind of where it's going. And I appreciated that about it. Because I feel like a lot of times with books where they throw it in, where they're like, oh, there's two love interests, which is she gonna pick? Spoiler, I hate love triangles a lot. They're one of my least favorite, like, book tropes, I guess. So I really appreciated that this did not have that. I appreciated that there wasn't any, like, you know, in like a Hallmark movie where there's sort of that stupid conflict where they need to like add a little conflict in there, so they make one little misunderstanding where the lady sees the guy like hugging some other woman, and instead of asking him about it, she just gets mad and goes back to the big city, and he has to come after her and explain that that was his sister or his cousin or whatever it was, and that it was all just this big misunderstanding, and it's absolutely ridiculous. Like, two adults should be able to have a conversation to explain, like, no, I'm not flirting with some other woman, I love you, blah blah blah. It didn't have any of that. Like, there is a moment of like kind of misunderstanding, confusion, or whatever, but they actually seem to handle it like reasonable adults, and I really appreciated that. So I really, really enjoyed this. I'm gonna go back to the library and try and see if I can get any more books by this author, and then see if I can get any more in the proper romance collection because I really do enjoy those books. I've read 2 or 3, I think, in that same proper romance. I don't know what you would call it. Is it a collection? Like a genre? But I've read a few of them and I really thoroughly enjoyed them. So those are the 2 that I have actually read. The rest of these here, obviously if you've watched my last video, my March reading wrap-up, I talked about how I have gotten back into the Mrs. Pollifax series, so I went ahead and grabbed the next couple of books in the series. This is book 4, which is A Palm for Mrs. Pollifax, and book 5, which is Mrs. Pollifax on Safari. So I've just read the first like chapter or so of this one. I'm excited. I need to finish reading these. Those are pretty quick and easy reads. Like, as you can see, they're kind of small. They're not lengthy novels by any means. And then the next 2 are actually books that I think these are fairly popular books. I'm one of those people that if something is really hyped or really popular, I typically will avoid it at all costs. I just... Maybe it's part of being a child in a big family, and so it's like your older sister does something and you're like, well, I am not going to do that because I'm not going to be the same person as you. I'm going to be my own person. Or maybe it's just my weird personality, but if something is really hyped or it's a big thing, I go the opposite direction. However, I've been very curious about this one. It's called Tress of the Emerald Sea by Brandon Sanderson. I heard somebody... yeah, he wrote it as a novel for his wife and then it ended up getting published or something. I think that's really sweet. So I haven't read any Brandon Sanderson at all. My husband has read, I think some of, is it the Mistborn series? I have no idea. Like I said, I've not read any of his stuff, but my husband has been reading Wheel of Time, and I believe it was Brandon Sanderson that helped complete like the series, like wrote the last couple of books in the series or something. So I'm familiar with the name, but I haven't ever actually read any of his books. And so this morning I just started reading like the very little bit, and it's already kind of made me laugh once. And also this particular edition is like gorgeous. There's this illustration right here at the beginning, like, oh, isn't that beautiful? So I'm curious. From the little bit that I have read so far, I'm intrigued. I think it'll be fun, but I'll let you know my thoughts after I've read more of it. And then this one is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater, and I'm intrigued by this one because I was watching Ahya, I believe that's how you pronounce it, Ahya's Cottage? Is that what it's called? It's a new to me YouTube channel that I found, and Ahya was talking about, I think it was her spring TBR video that I was watching, and she gushed about how much she absolutely loved this book. And I've heard of this book before, I'm almost positive. It intrigued me enough that I was prompted to pick it up at the library when I saw that it had it available. I was like, well, I'll give it a shot. And like I said, I am quite picky about the books that I read, so usually within a chapter or two I can tell if the characters are going to annoy me, if the story is going to be a little bit too stressful. I can usually tell pretty quickly. So those are the two that I'm kind of not sure if I'm going to read them or not, but we're going to give them a shot. So that's all that I have for this quite lengthy intro. I will check back in when I have read a bit more of specifically those books, because let's be real here, like, we know that these are just going to be fun, easy reads. But yeah, I will check back in later. Okay, it has been a couple weeks, I think, at least, since I filmed that last bit, and these books, these two, are due back at the library, I think in a couple days. I'm planning to go to the library today, so we need to do a little wrap-up of these. So, really quickly, the two Mrs. Pollifax books, I think there were two of them, that I mentioned previously, I've already read those. They've gone back to the library, and I've gotten the next two in the series. They were fantastic as always. Absolutely love them. So good. I've been distracted by some other books, or I would have already finished the next two books in the series, but that's how it goes. There's just so many books and so little time. So, let's talk about this one first. I'm DNFing it. So I read, I think maybe, I didn't get super far into this one. Maybe like 60 pages, somewhere a little bit over 60 pages, I think like 70 or so. It's not a bad book. I was talking with my husband about it and trying to like explain. I was like, it's not bad. It's just, it's odd. It's weird. I'm not sure that I think the writing is very well done. I think the story has the potential to be quite fascinating, but I'm just not in the mood for it. I'm not a super fantasy reader. My husband knows all the different terms for it. He'll be like, there's high fantasy and there's low fantasy and high magic and low, and he knows all these things. I do not. I just read books and have fun. He's a bit more like analytical, and he'll like kind of dissect things, and he's very smart. But we were talking about it, and I was just like, it's weird because in this book, you very much, it's its own world. Brandon Sanderson has created this unique world, and it doesn't really follow the rules of our world, Earth, etc. Things are very different, very odd. That's the only way. I kept telling my husband, I was like, it's odd. It's really odd. Not bad, just odd. And he was like, uh-huh. So he's created a whole world in it, and the rules, like the rules of nature and things, like the way that nature works in here is different. And it's a fantasy novel. Like, it makes sense, and I get that logically, but I just don't read a lot of fantasy books where it's like their own world. I kept comparing it to like The Lord of the Rings, where I was like, I love The Lord of the Rings, and it's very much its own world, but the rules of nature still apply. Like, water is still water, and the sky is still sky, and the sun and everything else. Like, it still follows the natural world laws. Tress does not. It has its own thing. It's doing its own thing. And I was very intrigued at the beginning, like the description of Tress at the very beginning of the book. It's like she's this gentle, calm, not very outspoken, quiet sort of a person, and I just relate to that on a very personal level. I'm very much an introvert. I am not a super outspoken person. I'm not going to give you all of my opinions right off the bat. It's just not going to happen. And so I related to that. She collects cups, which I was like, oh, that's so cool. Like, I like that. But then it just got a bit too weird for me. It's not to say that I won't ever come back to it. I'm not in the mood. I was telling my husband, I was like, maybe if I had picked this up in the fall or the winter, I would have been into it a little bit more. But right now, with spring and everything, I'm in the mood for like those sort of wholesome, fun, like Regency romances, Georgette Heyer, like Jane Austen, that sort of a thing. So I just think my mood is wrong for reading this book. So I'm just going to take it back to the library. I might pick it up in the future. I might not. I don't know. Like I said, I'm just not a big fantasy reader. I tend to prefer more like classic books, and I don't know. Hopefully you know what I mean. I just don't read a lot of fantasy. But yeah, so I didn't think it was bad. If you like fantasy, I think it could be a really fascinating, interesting book. I think it's a book that like my husband would like, but it's just not, I'm not in the mood. So that one I didn't finish. This one I did. I read this one. This one is Half a Soul by Olivia Atwater. And it's about Dora, who gets cursed and half of her soul is taken by this evil fairy lord. And because of that, she can't feel things the way that a normal human does. She doesn't get embarrassed. She doesn't feel super happy, super sad. She doesn't feel like any of those typical range of emotions. She just doesn't feel that way. Which I have seen, I can't remember for sure which person it was. I saw a YouTube video of somebody talking about this book just a little bit, and they talked about how because for most of the book the main character Dora doesn't feel things, that it was hard for them to relate to her. I didn't feel that way about this book. I thought it was a really interesting premise and really fascinating. I'm not going to give spoilers. Overall, I thought it was pretty good. If I were a person that did star ratings, I'd probably give it like a 3 or a 3.5 star, because it wasn't bad. It was very sweet. It was very wholesome. It was very nice. It was. I told my husband the way I described it is that it's a sweet, wholesome Regency romance with a splash of magical elements and fairy world. Like, that's how I would describe it. I thought the way that it ended didn't make me, like, it was a good, wholesome, happy ending sort of a thing. But how do I explain it? It almost felt like the two main love interests fell in love a little bit too quickly, that it wasn't really, their relationship wasn't quite fleshed out as well as it could be, and the big climax at the end or whatever, it felt a little flat to me. Like I said, it felt a little rushed, like a little bit too quickly for everything to happen. Like, too much was trying to be put into the book. And that could just be me. That could just be the sorts of books that I'm used to, like classics and things. But I did enjoy it. Like, don't get me wrong. It was quite a good book, and I very much appreciated the fact that it's clean romance. There's no spice or anything in it, which I do like. I'm not somebody that minds some spice in it, but I don't know if it's just because I'm getting older or what, but sometimes it's just so over the top that it's just ridiculous, and it makes it hard to like be in the book. You're just like, oh my gosh, like, why? So I appreciate it when they don't have all that element to it, and it can just be the sweet, wholesome, romantic side of things, because I think it can be very, very romantic. And even if you want to say, I think it can be very sexy and have that sexual tension without being super explicit. I think that's something that classic books do really well. Well, that was one of the other things where it was like the proposal scene. I was just like, I feel awkward. And it wasn't bad. There was nothing wrong with it. It's just, I just felt awkward about it. And I kept comparing it in my head to in Little Women, where there's a proposal scene in there, and it's just so good. but it's not, I would explain it as in a lot of modern books that I have read, like modern romances set in like a Regency time period or a historical time period, they seem to have to describe everything, like the way that he looked at her, the way that she looked at him, their eyes, their internal monologue that's going on, like everything is spelled out quite often in these like romantic scenes or romantic interactions, whereas in older books they assume that the reader kind of, you know, is getting those little heart flutters and the butterflies and things. They don't specify it. And there's something about that sort of mystery element to it where it's like they don't explain everything that I personally find quite a bit more romantic, because I don't want to know all the nitty-gritty details of it. It takes some of the I don't know, the whimsy and the charm out of it for me. So yeah. I thought it was a pretty good book. I did enjoy it. It is probably something where I'd be interested in reading. I think there was a little snippet in the back here where, what is it, another book by her, by Olivia Atwood? Yeah, it's 10,000 Stitches, and it looks like it's maybe like a Cinderella retelling. Like I would go and read that one. That's kind of how I would rate it, I guess, where it's not something where I'm just like, not interested in reading the rest of the series at all or anything else by this author. I would read more by this author. So I think that's pretty much spelled out everything that I have to think about these two books. I'm going to take them back to the library. You can kind of see it over here. I have another stack of library books over here, so I'm probably going to start another library reading video thing. But I hope that you enjoyed this one. I would love to know your thoughts on any of these books. If you've read Tress, I keep wanting to call her Tressa. If you have read Tress of the Emerald Sea, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Like I said, I don't think it's a bad book. I'm just not in the mood. If you've read Half a Soul, or if you've read 10,000 Stitches, the next book in the series, maybe? I'm not sure if it's a series officially. But if you've read anything else by Olivia Atwater, I can't remember if I've been calling her Atwood, but Atwater, I'd love to know that. But yeah, I hope that you are all doing well, you're enjoying some lovely cozy spring reading, and I will see you in the next one.